Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into something you probably never imagined could be thrilling Roman public restrooms. Picture this. You trudge through a bustling ancient city, the sun warm on your skin, the sound of clattering carts and distant chatter in the air, and suddenly you find yourself entering a grand hall filled with rows of marble seats, side by side with barely an inch of personal space. No stalls, no curtains, just you, your business, and the entire room watching. Yeah, you probably won't survive this without feeling a little twitch in your social anxiety, and that's exactly why this story matters. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see where in the world you're joining this slightly uncomfortable journey. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Public restrooms in ancient Rome were nothing like the private cubicles we expect today. Instead, they were grand communal spaces, almost like social clubs, where you'd do your business shoulder to shoulder, with neighbors, strangers, and sometimes even friends. These latrines weren't tucked away. They were often part of public bath complexes or marketplaces, places buzzing with life. Imagine sitting down for your meeting, the chatter all around with a cool breeze coming off the marble, and the scent. Well, the scent was probably less refreshing. Yet despite the lack of privacy, Romans flocked to these places. Privacy as a concept was wildly different then. They didn't have the same squeamishness about bodily functions that modern people do. Instead, using the latrine was just another part of daily social routine. Historians still argue whether this lack of privacy was truly comfortable for everyone, or if it masked a kind of early social anxiety that we just can't fully grasp from thousands of years later. But one thing's for sure, if you think today's public bathrooms can be awkward, try sitting next to a dozen people while you all do your thing without a single partition in sight. Interestingly, Roman public restrooms were architectural marvels in their own right. More than just places to go, they were symbols of Roman engineering and community. So as we unravel the story of these ancient facilities, we'll peek behind the marble walls and discover what these spaces taught us about social life, privacy, and yes, anxiety, in one of history's greatest empires. As you step further inside one of these ancient Roman public restrooms, your eyes immediately catch the gleam of smooth marble seats, arranged in a neat row, each with a circular hole carved out, waiting for its user. No partitions, no walls between seats, just open communal comfort. The design itself is striking benches carved from stone, with holes spaced evenly, often raised slightly above a continuous water channel running beneath them. This wasn't just for show. Romans were masters of engineering, and these public latrines had clever plumbing systems that used a constant flow of water to carry waste away. The water came from aqueducts, those massive gravity-powered stone bridges that delivered fresh water from distant sources straight into the city. The running water beneath the seats ensured that waste didn't pile up underfoot, which was revolutionary for its time. While it probably didn't smell like a rose garden, these innovations meant the restrooms were relatively speaking cleaner than many other ancient public spaces. In fact, some archaeologists suggest these latrines were so well maintained that using them felt more like visiting a spa than an unpleasant necessity. But what about toilet paper? You might be imagining some roll or wipes, But no such luxury existed. Instead, Romans used a shared tool, known as a tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick. After you finished your business, you dip this sponge in the flowing water channel to clean yourself. This might sound horrifying now. Imagine sharing a sponge with dozens of people, but it was the standard hygiene practice. Some places even had attendants whose job was to rinse the tersorium in vinegar or salt water between uses to keep things as sanitary as possible. Historians still argue whether this was genuinely effective or just a polite fiction masking the inevitable germs. And hygiene wasn't just about the sponge. The location of these latrines was often carefully chosen near public baths or marketplaces combining cleansing and convenience. The baths themselves were places to scrub and relax after the daily grind, and using the latrine was often the first or last step in that routine. The constant water flow helped prevent the buildup of grime, but of course, the sheer number of users sometimes made cleanliness a challenge. Oddly enough, the Romans even engineered a sort of toilet music, or at least a way to mask awkward noises. Archaeologists found evidence that some latrines had nearby fountains or running water features, which might have helped drown out sounds and ease embarrassment. Because while privacy wasn't a priority, comfort was still on their minds. You might wonder how people dealt with the lack of personal space. Well, the design encouraged socializing, which we'll explore more in the next section, but also meant you had to get comfortable with being seen in your most vulnerable moments. No whispers or secret glances here. Everything was on full display. So the marble seats, the clever sewage flow, and the tersorium all combined into a bathroom experience that was a mix of practical engineering and shared humanity. It might not match today's standards of privacy or hygiene, but it shows a fascinating chapter in the history of sanitation and a whole lot about how Romans balanced public health and social norms. You settle into your spot on the marble bench, and suddenly you realize this isn't just a place to relieve yourself. It's a hub of gossip, banter, and downright socializing. Roman public latrines were the original community lounges. And yes, people actually enjoyed hanging out there. It sounds bizarre to modern ears, who voluntarily chats while doing their business. But the Romans embraced this communal experience wholeheartedly. Unlike today's solitary bathroom breaks, these latrines offered a chance to catch up with neighbors, debate politics, or trade the latest juicy tidbits. Picture the scene: you're seated next to a wool merchant, a toga-clad senator, and maybe even a traveling gladiator, all side by side, sharing news and opinions with casual ease. The acoustics of these stone rooms were surprisingly conducive to conversation, and the steady sound of running water provided a sort of gentle white noise, setting the stage for easy chatter. Historians have uncovered graffiti on the walls of some latrines ranging from crude jokes to love declarations and political slogans. This hints at the lively atmosphere where people express themselves freely, often cheekily, in a setting that was anything but private. Imagine leaning over to your buddy and whispering, "Did you hear about the senator's scandal?" while the rest of the room listens in, because, well, there was no escape. Roman poet Juvenal once satirized these gatherings, mocking the constant chatter and nosiness as a kind of social glue. But beyond the jokes, the latrine served a real social function. It was a rare egalitarian space where people of different classes could mingle. Although there were still social rules and hierarchies, the bathroom gave a unique chance for more direct interaction, without the usual barriers of wealth or status. You might wonder if this social openness made people less embarrassed or anxious. Some scholars think it did by normalizing the act of relieving oneself in public Romans, reduced shame and awkwardness around their bodily functions. Others argue it might have intensified a kind of social pressure, forcing individuals to perform even in moments of vulnerability. This communal aspect also extended to the tools of hygiene, the tersorium. Sharing that sponge stick wasn't just a practical matter. It was a symbol of shared experience binding users together in a somewhat intimate ritual. Sure, it might make you shudder, but for them it was just part of life's rhythm. There's also debate about how exactly conversations were shaped by the setting. Did people use the latrine as a safe space for gossip because it was away from the more formal parts of daily life? Or was it more a matter of convenience, since everyone had to be there anyway? Historians still puzzle over these nuances. Whatever the case, the Roman public restroom was less a place of silent suffering and more a noisy, chatty community spot, proving that even in the most unexpected places humans crave connection. So here you are, sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers in that echoing marble chamber, and suddenly it hits you. How the heck did Romans manage the awkwardness? Today, the thought of having zero privacy, while attending to your most personal needs, triggers instant social anxiety for many. But in ancient Rome, this was just normal life. How did they cope? Historians still debate whether the Romans truly felt comfortable in these communal settings, or if they developed unspoken social rules to hide a kind of early social anxiety that simply isn't recorded in official texts. Think about it. Even now, many people hesitate to use a busy public restroom, gripping their phone or avoiding eye contact like it's a survival skill. For Romans, social anxiety had to manifest differently. Maybe it was tempered by cultural norms that made bodily functions less taboo. After all, they didn't shy away from discussing toilets in poetry and satire. Still, the presence of so many others at such intimate moments suggests that Romans had to navigate a social dance, balancing exposure and decorum. Some scholars propose that there were latrine etiquette rules unwritten, but strongly felt: don't stare, don't interrupt, don't talk about what you're doing, unless you wanted to strike up that gossip we mentioned earlier. This delicate balance likely helped ease anxiety. People developed a kind of social armor, a practiced ease, that kept the communal restroom from becoming a scene of embarrassment or conflict. On the other hand, some archaeological evidence hints at ways Romans might have sought privacy or distraction. Some latrines were built with small alcoves or partial walls, and in larger bath complexes, quieter rooms allowed more solitude. And remember, the fountains or running water noise that might have doubled as white noise to cover any embarrassing sounds. Then there's the question of why the Romans embraced communal toilets so enthusiastically. It's possible that sharing this space was a way of reinforcing social bonds, literally showing that everyone from senator to slave was human, dealing with the same needs. That common humanity could have eased feelings of isolation or anxiety, a comforting reminder that no one was alone in their vulnerability. Of course, this theory isn't without dissent. Some historians argue the Roman elite may have privately preferred their own arrangements, and that public latrines were mainly for the masses who had little choice. The social anxiety of the upper class could have been masked by wealth and privacy behind closed doors. Still, the existence of such openly shared restrooms challenges our modern assumptions about personal space and social comfort. It suggests that anxiety is deeply tied to culture and expectations, not just biology. Next time you're awkwardly waiting in line at a modern restroom, remember the Roman communal toilet, a place where millions braved exposure every day, possibly mastering their social jitters, long before you ever worried about yours. You might be wondering what exactly they used to clean themselves after a bathroom break. There were no toilet paper rolls here, obviously. Instead, the Romans had a curious tool called the tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick. After doing their business, a user would take the sponge, dip it in a water channel running beneath the marble seats, and then wipe themselves. Sounds a bit uninviting from our modern perspective, but it was considered perfectly normal back then. The tersorium was communal, passed from person to person, cleaned between uses by dipping it in water, mixed with vinegar or salt, or sometimes rinsed by attendants. This shared sponge practice highlights how differently the Romans approached hygiene and social boundaries. You might shudder at the thought, but to them it was hygienic and practical. Historians still argue whether this practice spread diseases, or if the antiseptic rinsing was effective enough to prevent it. The ingenious Roman sewage system made all this possible. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems, channeled waste out of the city through underground tunnels. This marvel of engineering helped keep the city from drowning in its own filth and allowed the latrines to maintain a constant flow of water. The water acted as a flushing mechanism, keeping things moving and reducing unpleasant odors. Beyond the sponge, Romans used other hygiene tools, too small, wooden sticks, cloths, and even their own hands, though the tersorium was most common in public latrines. Interestingly, some latrines had basins for washing hands, after showing a concern for cleanliness that feels surprisingly modern. Roman engineering brilliance extended to the plumbing, aqueducts, and sewer design that supported these facilities. Water was brought in from distant mountain springs, delivered through miles of stone aqueducts, and then distributed to public baths and toilets. Wastewater was channeled through stone drains, often to nearby rivers or farmland. The engineering feats behind these facilities weren't just practical. They were status symbols. Maintaining clean, functioning latrines showed the power and civility of Roman governance. Still, it wasn't perfect blockages. Occasional floods and foul smells were part of the daily reality. Some records even mention complaints about the noise and smell of latrines near residential areas. So this mix of shared sponges and advanced plumbing illustrates a fascinating contrast. Crude hygiene tools combined with sophisticated water management. It's a reminder that the Romans didn't just build an empire. They engineered solutions to the everyday messiness of life. Now, who exactly used these latrines? Was it an equal opportunity relief station for all Romans? Well, not quite. Public restrooms were designed for communal use, but access was shaped heavily by social class, gender, and status. The reality is a bit more complicated than you might expect. For starters, these latrines were primarily for free citizens. Slaves in the lower classes often had to make do with less comfortable or private arrangements, sometimes resorting to chamber pots or outdoor facilities. But public latrines were commonly found near marketplaces, baths, and other public venues, where a broad cross-section of society mingled. That said, not everyone had equal comfort or freedom to use these spaces without social constraints. Emperors and the aristocracy typically preferred private facilities, luxurious toilets in their villas, sometimes even with running water, and fancy seats decorated with ivory or bronze. Yet historical sources suggest some elite Romans did use public latrines, either out of necessity or for social reasons. This might have been part of blending in, or simply because public baths were popular gathering spots regardless of status. There's also evidence that latrines near gladiatorial arenas or amphitheaters were popular with spectators, which meant a more mixed social crowd, from wealthy patrons to common folk. Still, social hierarchy didn't vanish seating arrangements. Access times or latrine locations often subtly reflected one's rank. Interestingly, the poor or slaves had their own ways to deal with nature's call, often far less sanitary or dignified. Archaeologists have found waste pits near poorer neighborhoods, showing a stark contrast to the sophisticated sewage flow under the city's grand latrines. Historians still argue how much class distinction influenced latrine usage, and if some public toilets were segregated by social rank. Some argue that the egalitarian nature of the communal latrine may have momentarily dissolved status lines, while others say social tensions still played out even there. One quirky note, some latrines had graffiti insulting or mocking certain social groups, suggesting that while people shared the same seats, social rivalries and prejudices definitely lingered in the air, alongside the less pleasant smells. So using a Roman public restroom wasn't just about biology. It was another stage where the complex social dramas of the empire unfolded. You might think your daily bathroom routine is dull, but imagine balancing nature's call with empire-wide class politics. Now that's multitasking. You might be wondering about gender. Did women join in this communal bathroom scene? Or were Roman public latrines strictly a male domain? The answer is intriguingly unclear, and historians still debate how gender shaped access to these spaces. Some archaeological evidence points to the existence of separate facilities for women, but these were far less common and often simpler or more makeshift than their male counterparts. Public latrines found in major bath complexes and marketplaces typically appear designed for men, while women likely had private toilets in their homes or less formal arrangements. The few female latrines identified tend to be smaller and more discreet, often located away from the bustling social hubs. Gender norms in Rome placed a high value on modesty for women, especially of higher status, so it makes sense they might avoid the open communal latrines. Yet poorer women and slaves may have had to use public facilities out of necessity, just like men, but probably with more discomfort. Interestingly, some literary sources and graffiti hint at women's experiences in or attitudes toward latrines. A handful of inscriptions joke about women's bathroom habits, revealing a mix of humor and social critique. This suggests women were at least aware of the communal latrine culture, even if they were not full participants. There's also speculation about whether women and men might have used the same latrines at different times, though no solid evidence confirms this. Historians debate whether the lack of extensive female latrine ruins is due to true separation or just poorer preservation of their facilities. This uncertainty around gender and privacy in ancient Rome shows how the concept of privacy itself was fluid and culturally shaped. What felt acceptable or necessary for one group might be unimaginable for another. So while male Roman citizens likely embraced the noisy social shoulder-to-shoulder latrine experience, women's bathroom habits were probably more private, more restricted, and thus more anxious in a different way. the communal toilet culture wasn't equally shared, revealing much about Roman society's gender dynamics. Remember this debate about who used these latrines and how it relates to gender roles. Highlights that even in a civilization famous for public life privacy and social norms were complex and often contradictory. Now let's take a closer sniff at the myths, rumors, and downright strange ideas Romans had about bathroom hygiene, and see how those ancient beliefs ripple into our modern fears. Roman public latrines were not just practical spaces. They were surrounded by all sorts of weird theories about health and disease that tell us a lot about their worldview. For instance, many Romans believed that bad smells, what they called miasma, could cause illness, a bit like how we now know germs spread, but without the scientific proof. So running water and good airflow were prized not just for comfort, but as protection against these invisible disease-causing vapors. Historians still argue whether this miasma theory was just superstition or an early grasp of contagion by smell. There were also strange remedies connected to the latrine experience. Some people believed that placing certain herbs or substances near the bathroom could ward off disease or evil spirits. You might even find bits of garlic or myrtle in the ruins' Roman aromatherapy, if you will. But the weirdest rumor had to do with the tersorium sponge. Some critics claimed that sharing this sponge spread all kinds of infections from skin diseases to worse. Others argued that the constant rinsing in vinegar or salt water kept it safe. Scholars debate whether these ancient sanitation methods helped or hurt public health. The toilets themselves sometimes sparked urban legends. A popular belief was that latrines were haunted by spirits or curses, especially if someone died suddenly near or in them. This kind of superstition reveals how vulnerable people felt about these places, despite their everyday use. Interestingly, some ancient texts include warnings about the dangers of holding in your waste, or ignoring the call of nature, suggesting Romans recognized the health risks of poor bathroom habits. However, the lack of modern medical knowledge meant their explanations were often mixed with magic or moral judgment. We can still see echoes of these ancient anxieties today in our discomfort with public bathrooms, the sometimes obsessive hygiene rituals, and the endless rumors about what lurks unseen on toilet seats. So while Roman latrines might seem gross by modern standards, they also offer a fascinating glimpse into how humans have long grappled with the tension between natural bodily functions and cultural fears. Public restrooms weren't just about hygiene, they were also arenas of power. Control over these communal spaces reflected the broader political and social dynamics of ancient Rome. When you think about it, managing who gets access to clean, functioning latrines was a way for the elite and city planners to demonstrate authority and civic pride. Emperors often funded the construction of public baths and latrines as a means of winning favor with the populace. These weren't just practical buildings, they were monuments to Roman engineering prowess and the benevolence of leadership. Sponsoring a new latrine or sewage system was like today's politicians building parks or community centers, visible proof they cared about the city's well-being. But control wasn't just about generosity. Access to these facilities could also reinforce social hierarchies. Certain latrines were reserved for specific groups or located in neighborhoods tied to particular classes. The elite might have private bathrooms, but the masses depended on public restrooms, so denying or limiting access was a subtle form of exclusion. Interestingly, Some latrines became hotspots for political gossip and even dissent. Graffiti on the walls sometimes included sharp critiques of officials' coded insults or calls for reform. So the latrine walls doubled as a bulletin board of public opinion, a kind of ancient social media in stone. Historians still argue whether controlling these public amenities was primarily about sanitation or social control. Did the Roman rulers genuinely aim to improve public health, or were latrines just tools to exert influence over the urban population? Also think about the power dynamics in managing maintenance. Who cleaned the latrines? Usually it was slaves or lower-class workers whose labor kept these communal hubs functioning, yet whose voices were rarely heard. This labor hierarchy mirrored the wider social order, reinforcing power through control of the most basic human needs. So in a way, Roman public restrooms were microcosms of empire-wide power plays, reminding us that even the most mundane parts of life are woven into the fabric of politics and control. As you settle back into that marble bench, the psychological aspect of sharing your most vulnerable moments in public starts to dawn on you. What does it say about Roman attitudes toward the self and others that they were so comfortable, or at least accustomed to relieving themselves shoulder to shoulder with strangers? The psychology of communal relief reveals a lot about how Romans viewed community individuality and social boundaries. Unlike today's obsession with privacy, Romans seem to embrace a more collective sense of identity. The act of using the latrine was not something to hide, but part of shared human experience. This openness could have fostered a kind of social bonding, a reminder that everyone had the same basic needs, breaking down barriers between classes and individuals. At the same time, sitting side by side with others required unspoken rules and emotional regulation. You had to master a delicate balance, be social enough to join conversations or catch up on gossip, but also maintain enough decorum not to offend. This interplay probably taught Romans early lessons in social anxiety management, how to stay composed even when exposed. Interestingly, the communal nature of these latrines may have encouraged a form of social conformity. Participating in this daily ritual together created a shared rhythm and reinforced group identity. At the same time, it could generate feelings of vulnerability or embarrassment, especially for newcomers or outsiders. Historians still debate whether this exposure promoted psychological resilience or masked underlying anxieties. Did the daily public act of relief normalize bodily functions so thoroughly that shame vanished? Or did people develop coping mechanisms, maybe mental distractions or humor, to ease discomfort? Some literary works hint at the use of jokes, satire, and playful insults as ways Romans dealt with the situation. Humor likely served as social glue and a way to diffuse tension. After all, if you can laugh about your neighbor's loud fart, maybe the moment isn't so terrifying after all. So the Roman public latrine was more than a bathroom. It was a social classroom, where citizens learned about themselves and each other, negotiating vulnerability and connection in a way we still wrestle with today. Moving forward, it's fascinating to trace how Roman bathroom design influenced the evolution of public sanitation, shaping facilities well beyond antiquity. After the fall of the Roman Empire, much of the sophisticated infrastructure like aqueducts and sewage systems fell into disrepair. But the concept of communal latrines lingered, morphing over time. Medieval Europe inherited some of Rome's public restroom ideas, but often regressed in hygiene and design. Instead of flowing water waste, frequently emptied into open gutters or cesspits. Latrines were still communal in places like castles or monasteries, but the engineering marvel of running water was largely lost. This decline arguably increased disease spread, reminding us how essential Roman innovations were. However, the idea of public toilets as social spaces didn't disappear entirely. Medieval latrines often became sites for casual conversation or necessary gossip echoing the Roman tradition. Yet privacy norms started to shift gradually, especially in wealthier homes, where enclosed chambers appeared. Fast forward to the Renaissance and Enlightenment eras, when new interest in sanitation sparked advances in plumbing and bathroom privacy. Indoor plumbing became more common among elites, while public latrines remained basic. By the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution and urbanization demanded better sanitation infrastructure, leading to modern sewer systems, inspired by Roman principles, but adapted for denser cities. Public toilets began to include stalls, doors, and partitions, features designed to respect personal space and reduce social anxiety, a stark contrast to the Roman open seating. Yet some communal elements survived, like multi-seat facilities in schools and workplaces, reminding us that complete privacy is a relatively modern invention. Historians still argue about how much Roman bathroom design directly influenced later periods, versus how much modern sanitation developed independently. Regardless, the Romans set foundational ideas using water to carry waste away, engineering durable plumbing and integrating sanitation into urban planning. Next time you visit a public restroom with stalls and running water, remember you're walking in the footsteps of Romans who first turned bathrooms into engineered social spaces, balancing hygiene, architecture, and community. Now it's worth zooming out to compare Roman communal latrines with bathroom customs in other ancient cultures, revealing how social anxiety, or its absence, played out differently around the world. While Romans embraced the open, noisy toilet culture, other civilizations took contrasting approaches. Take ancient Greece, for example, where public toilets existed, but were less grandiose and more private in design. Greeks often favored separate seats with more spacing, suggesting an early sensitivity to personal space. However, like the Romans, bathrooms were social spaces, sometimes part of gymnasiums or bath complexes. Historians still debate whether Greeks felt more embarrassment or comfort than Romans when using these spaces. In contrast, many ancient Asian cultures, such as in China or Japan, had distinctly different practices. Some evidence points to the use of squat toilets, often located outdoors or in smaller individual rooms. Privacy and separation were more emphasized, likely reflecting cultural values about modesty and personal boundaries. Social anxiety, if present, may have stemmed more from gender or class rules rather than the bathroom setting itself. Meanwhile, in the Indus Valley civilization, sophisticated drainage systems hint at communal or semi-communal facilities, but direct evidence about social behavior there is scarce. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over how much these bathrooms were shared and whether they encouraged social interaction or solitude. Even within Rome, regional variations existed. Some provinces adapted latrine design to local customs or climate, which affected how communal the experience really was. So social anxiety and comfort in bathrooms were always culturally shaped, not universal. This comparative lens helps us realize that our own bathroom anxieties are deeply cultural. What makes one society uneasy might be perfectly normal to another. The Roman latrine culture challenges our modern Western ideas of privacy, reminding us that human comfort zones vary widely through time and place. So when you next feel awkward, waiting for a stall, remember you're part of a long, varied human story, one that spans continents and millennia, full of different norms about who shares space and when. Imagine standing in the ruins of a famous Roman latrine, like the ones unearthed in Pompeii or Ostia, the ancient port city. These archaeological sites give us an up-close look at the daily realities of Roman communal toilets, and some surprising personal habits preserved in stone and graffiti. Pompeii's latrines, for example, reveal stone benches with perfectly round holes, worn smooth by centuries of use. What's fascinating is the range of graffiti etched into the walls, some cheeky jokes about who's been sitting here, declarations of love, and even rude caricatures. These inscriptions show a playful side to bathroom culture, where humor helped ease social tension. At Ostia, archaeologists found evidence of latrines connected to large bath complexes, complete with running water and sponges on sticks. But the oddest discovery was a set of small clay tokens near some latrines, which some interpret as a kind of ancient pay-to-use system, or hygiene tokens. This hints at a layer of commerce and control, even in these private moments. Personal artifacts, like bone or metal tools for scraping or cleaning, have also been uncovered, suggesting that despite shared sponges, some Romans carried their own hygiene implements. This might have been a way to assert personal boundaries in an otherwise communal environment. Historians still debate the full meaning of these finds. Did the graffiti represent genuine camaraderie or passive-aggressive social jabs? Were the hygiene tokens common or rare? And how widespread was the practice of carrying personal cleaning tools? These mysteries add texture to our understanding of Roman latrines, as spaces rich with social complexity. These ruins and relics bring the ancient latrine experience vividly to life, reminding us that behind every marble seat sat a real person with quirks, habits, and maybe a bad sense of humor. So next time you're stuck in a bathroom line, remember Romans had their own bathroom drama, written in stone and sponge. Now fast forward to today, and you might be surprised how echoes of Roman communal bathroom culture still linger in modern public restrooms, if you look closely. Sure, we've traded marble benches for plastic stalls, and shared sponges for disposable toilet paper, but the social dynamics aren't entirely different. Think about those busy airport restrooms or stadium bathrooms, where privacy is limited queues, are long and small talk, sometimes bubbles up. You still share the space with strangers, navigate social awkwardness, and maybe even catch gossip, or overhear tense conversations. The modern public restroom, in a way, inherits that communal vibe, just with more walls. In some parts of the world, communal squat toilets are still common, especially in public or rural areas, maintaining a shared experience closer to Roman times. Even in upscale venues, open-plan restrooms with multiple sinks or urinals can create that subtle pressure of being seen judged or overheard. The social anxiety surrounding these spaces is alive and well. People employ all sorts of coping strategies, from fidgeting with phones to avoiding eye contact or rushing through the act as fast as possible. Yet humor and shared discomfort remain part of the story, just as they did with the Romans. Interestingly, designers and architects have started to rethink public restrooms with a focus on privacy, comfort, and inclusivity, responding to this social anxiety. Innovations include more private stalls, gender-neutral facilities, and sensory considerations like calming colors or soundproofing, aiming to reduce stress and create a more welcoming environment. Historians still argue how much ancient practices influence modern bathroom design versus how much cultural shifts have transformed our approach to privacy and social comfort. So while you might curse the next time you face a crowded public restroom, remember, you're participating in a millennia-old social ritual. We're all in this shared discomfort together, from the marble latrines of Rome to today's tiled stalls. As you bring yourself to the final moments in this ancient yet strangely familiar setting, it's worth reflecting on what Roman public restrooms teach us about social anxiety today. These marble benches, shared sponges, and running water weren't just about hygiene. They were about community vulnerability and human connection. In a world where privacy is highly prized, the Romans remind us that discomfort around bodily functions is largely cultural. They face their fears of exposure by normalizing the experience, transforming a potentially embarrassing moment into a shared social ritual. This challenges us to reconsider our own anxieties and how much of them stem from societal expectations rather than innate discomfort. The Roman latrines were both a literal and metaphorical space, where hierarchy faded, momentarily revealing the universality of human needs. Whether you were senator or slave, you faced the same challenge, and that shared experience may have helped ease the sting of social anxiety. Historians still debate the nuances of Roman attitudes, but what remains clear is the insight these ancient toilets provide into human psychology and culture. They show us that social anxiety isn't new. It's been with us for millennia, shaped by how we live together and how we negotiate privacy. So next time you feel awkward in a public restroom, remember the Romans. They might not have had stalls or toilet paper, but they had something equally powerful, a sense of community in vulnerability. Now, let the images of cool marble seats and flowing water fade gently from your mind. Imagine the soft murmur of voices, the distant splash of water, and the feeling of belonging to a crowd that understands you in your most human moments. As you drift off, carry this thought: we are all connected through time by the simple shared experience of being human. Sleep well, knowing that even in discomfort, you're part of a long, strange, and sometimes hilarious history. Word count, 1050. Wind down. As the night deepens, allow your thoughts to slow like the gentle flow of water beneath those ancient marble seats. There's a soothing rhythm in knowing that across centuries and cultures, people have faced the same vulnerabilities you do now. The walls of time grow thin, and in this quiet moment, your unease softens, replaced by a calm understanding. Picture the warm glow of a Roman lamp fading as voices hush the day's chatter, giving way to peaceful silence. Let the shared humanity you've glimpsed ease your mind and settle your heart. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight, rest in the comfort of connection through awkwardness, laughter, and the endless dance of social life. Good night.